We were married almost 3 years, and then we were divorced. When we actually divorced, it was a very, very difficult season for me. Very difficult for him too. We now have more answers as to what was probably going on for him.
In reading your story in your book and that part of it, it was, I feel like you took us, or you take us on that journey, that emotional journey with you. Mm-hmm. And as surprised as you were, I was surprised to read when I'm reading this, like, oh my goodness. It just seems like things were going along great. And then all of a sudden here he comes and he's like, I want a divorce.
Yeah.
Before we get into this episode, I just had to jump on and say thank you so much for making our podcast one of the top 5 in all of Arizona. Super cool. And if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our future episodes. And you can find us on all podcast platforms. Thanks for watching.
This is The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Whether you're a seasoned real estate expert, a first-time home buyer, or if you're simply passionate about hearing small business stories, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we dive deep into the world of real estate and beyond.
Well, welcome to episode 39 of The Real Deal. I am your host, Janine Igliani, and my guest today is a dear friend of mine. We've known each other. I was trying to think about this, Shawna, like, how long has it been?
I was just thinking of that yesterday.
We moved to Power Ranch in 2007, and I feel like we probably met right around that time.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
16 plus years. So,
and kids and oh my gosh. And now, you have daughter-in-laws, which is crazy, or daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
So my friend Shawna Meek, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited because your story is an amazing story, but you're also an author and wrote a book.
So I hear.
So tell us, just go back to the beginning of your story a little bit. Like, I want to know where you're from, where you grew up, and kind of how you got to Arizona, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. So I was born and raised in California. So born in LA, grew up in Orange County, went to school, went to college an hour away.
Where did you go to high school, by the way?
So I went to Irvine High School.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then went to Loyola Marymount in LA by LAX, and then came back to Orange County. And that was my stomping ground for a long time until in May, it'll be 18 years.
Yeah.
So almost 19 summers in Arizona.
Which
how
are
we
crazy.
used to count them.
I know, right?
So, yeah.
Okay. What brought you to Arizona?
So at the time, well, it's a little bit part of our story too, so I can kind of weave that in.
Let's do it.
So when Kevin and I were first married, we were married and we lived in Westminster. And so, California. And when we were first married, we were married almost 3 years, and then we were divorced, and Kevin left the marriage when we had almost a 1-year-old. So he was just shy of 1, and very abruptly and very suddenly. And so at that point, when I'll get to the story of what brought us to Arizona, but when we actually divorced, it was a very, very difficult season for me. Very difficult for him too. We now have more answers as to what was probably going on for him. But we look at it was just an overwhelm at the time for him.
Can we pause really quick there? Yeah. So in reading your story in your book and that part of it, it was, I feel like you took us, or you take us on that journey, that emotional journey with you. Mm-hmm. And as surprised as you were, I was surprised to read when I'm reading this, like, oh my goodness. It just seems like things were going along great. And then all of a sudden here he comes and he's like, I want a divorce.
Yeah.
Is that how it felt?
Pretty close. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. From one day to the next, it was shocking. And we had started, we had a new baby, we had a new house, we both were working at the time. And I know there was a lot of stress. So we had started, our communication wasn't great from the beginning, but it was like, okay, let's do some, let's get some help here. And so we went into counseling. And so I thought, great, like this is going to help us. And then from one day to the next, literally, I woke up, he went to work, came home, and then wanted a divorce. And so yeah,
So no
shocked
signs,
just as much.
just like, I mean, yes, there were struggles, but there's always struggles in new, especially new married. Now you have a baby. This seems kind of normal, but then this comes.
Yeah.
And you guys you divorced.
We did.
And so talk about that. You went and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So in California, it takes a full year from time of like basically stating to the courts, you're going to divorce. Back then, at least it was. And so that was a full year of, me immediately going back to my parents' home because I had such a new baby or, newer baby that was still, needing to feed and care for. And went home to my family's home and at the time and, really wrestled. I mean, begged, pleaded, prayed, all the things to really just try and figure out what was going on. So I found support pretty quickly. It was never I blame you, Shawna, for the divorce. It was, I can't do this. I can be a father, but I can't be a husband and a father, which was shocking to me. This is what we talked about when we were dating. Like, what in the world's happening here? So, so that happened. We officially divorced a year later. And then I started, really trying to heal from that and get my own healing and really grieving through that, divorce support groups, all sorts of things.
And you were also kind of newer in your faith, right?
I was.
Yeah.
So in the time of the divorce, I knew of God, but I didn't know God. I didn't know Jesus. I didn't have that step in my faith yet until literally my world came crashing down. And it's me and my baby going, this was not ever my plan. Where are you, God? Who are you, God? And so that's still such an emotional part of my story that I look back and I'm so grateful for that part of it. I mean, I never will say I'm grateful for the divorce, but I'm so grateful that it brought me literally to my knees on my face and saying, God, who are you?
That's I just want to hold there for a second because there are people that are probably going to listen to this podcast and they're maybe going through a really hard time and thinking like, where are you, God, in all of this? Like, why am I struggling? Why am I suffering? Why am I experiencing this? So how do you get through that?
Clinging, just one day at a time. Like, I think there were so many different types of supports. People cared for me, loved me, I went and visited my best friend out of state. She just tried to love on me, but there was never, I couldn't make sense of it. Kevin couldn't make sense of it truly at the time. And I mean, we still, there's still not a reason for leaving a marriage like that. But I look back and I think I really like the word clinging, just coming back to God, wrestling it all out. Like I said, face down on the ground, rocking my baby, like just getting curious.
Yeah.
Like I knew there was a God. So that part I did know. And I didn't have, I didn't have things that were harmful in my spirituality. So that part really helped, I think, me. And not everybody, not all the listeners have been there, but I look at like, what did I need in that moment? And I needed someone that really understood me, saw me, and saw all my pain. Because other people in my life could see it, but they were pretty mad too. So going through all the grief stages was a big deal. Yeah. And so
I think it's a good reminder of like, we don't know sometimes why things happen until we're way down the road, right? And we can see how God uses that and how it's not ever wasted. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It doesn't make it easier.
No,
and it doesn't,
not in the moment, especially.
Right? Like, okay, but sometimes we have to walk through those hard times to get to the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you dated. I can't imagine right? Like trying to navigate that world.
Gosh. I hated every minute of that moment. Those moments. There were moments that I was like, all right, just have fun with it.
Right.
But once I like got a few years in, I was like, okay, well, I'm still in my, I was not even 30 yet. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I did date. I started dating, I will say. And yeah.
How was that? I mean, that would have been, I can't imagine, like.
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was awkward. Like I felt like I was never a good dater anyway. So I just like look back and I'm like, I don't know what that really even means. But, when you have what you thought you really desired and you're like, I thought this was my person.
Right.
I thought this was my life. I thought this was my future. And I knew one of my driving forces was truly like, I didn't want to have an only child, which there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, that wasn't my heart's desire. And so that was a little bit of my motivation. I knew I wasn't going to jump into anything, but it was a wrestle. I mean, there were times where it was like, just get dressed and let's go.
So as equally as surprising was him letting you know he wanted to divorce, he wanted to end the marriage, was then a few years later, he brings Connor home and gives you a letter. That was equally surprising.
Yeah. Could you feel being on that couch with me? Like I'm like,
just emotions.
Oh yeah. I mean, and at this point, and I do write about this, but the one thing that we could do well is we really were trying to focus on co-parenting really well for Connor. And we both had that same goal and value. And so that really motivated us. I mean, we had monthly meetings. We'd meet at the local Denny's or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I'd let him come into my home. He was respectful of that. And I had a lot of strong boundaries in other arenas, but I'd let him come in and put Connor to bed. And Connor was getting close to about 3 at that point. And and he left one night, just like the other nights he'd come in, because I had about 80% custody at the time, and handed me a letter on the way out the door. And I thought, no, you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
As equally as I did want to date, I certainly was like, oh, no more chances.
Okay. So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And you don't have to answer it.
Yeah.
So I know you said you're an open book, right? So we'll see. We'll test that.
Yeah.
In that time that you guys were separated, anything happen? It did.
Meaning
like any,
physically?
Yeah.
No.
Yes. No.
So
once that was it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing happened. Like once that was it, I was like, I mean, there wasn't even a kiss.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Mm-mm. That had to have been hard.
That was really hard. I mean, because there were so many times that I was so vulnerable
I'm sure.
and craving and longing
for
like this.
connection.
I was like sleeping next to you in bed one day and then never again. Like even just that. But I really, the one thing that I really did hold that boundary, or those boundaries, those physical, like sexual, intimate connection, conversation. Like he just didn't have that access to me anymore. And so that was hard. That was really hard in the first 6 months, especially because there were vulnerable moments. I mean, I would still cry on the phone. So he would see that as I was pleading for something different, which was so hard. So hard. But no, I'm totally open answering that.
Okay.
Yep.
So do we tell what that was in this letter?
Sure. I probably have it somewhere in my house, but it was, the moment I saw his handwriting's really, really small. You could probably fit like 2 lines on a line kind of thing. And the moment I saw his handwriting, like my heart just sank, because I was like, this is not just a random letter or a thank you or, like a note like this. There's something deeper here. And a lot of it, it was probably a page and a half of this small handwriting of what he had been doing the last, couple of years, and going to counseling and therapy himself, and really looking deeply at what happened and why it happened. And the biggest part was, I've made a grave mistake. Like I have made a horrible mistake. And would you consider probably it was something like, would you consider dating or giving this a try again? Like, I don't remember the exact words, but it was, would you consider? And I thought, oh no, I think I probably put it down, probably didn't even finish it from my memory. Like there's moments that I'm like, I don't know that I was totally in my body at that moment. But I remember where I was. And so it was,
super interesting, because kind of we're sensing a theme here with Kevin with these like sudden, what appear to be, right? These sudden changes with no other indicators, right?
Exactly.
So after a lot of time in prayer, you gave it a go.
I did. God nudged me to give it a go because I knew him now. So I was like, oh, no.
Right.
Can you give me this out?
Right.
So gave it a go and started dating.
When you in thinking through like that decision, how did you arrive? I mean, I'm sure there was hurt and anger and frustration. And now you're putting me through this again of like this roller coaster of emotions almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you arrive at that place to say, I'm going to give this a go? Was it just the Lord putting that on your heart, or was there?
Mostly it was interesting timing. To this day, I don't even know if he knew where I was headed that weekend, but I was headed to my church at the time, the single parents retreat for the second year in a row. And I felt so brave that I like conquered this once, and I'm going to go do this for us. And my son and I were a family. And so I tucked that letter away real quick and just was like, I'll meet you on the mountain, God. Like, just get up to the mountain and we'll have some chats about this. Cause I'm not on board. And it was weeks. I mean, it was definitely weeks of just sitting in like that even possibility before I even considered it. And the thing was, it was truly just God and I, because if I would have told one person in my world at the time, I would have gotten so much, probably a variety of feedback. Some, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Your family can be together. And that wasn't my motivation. But I also know that some would have been like, oh no, do not hurt her again. And that was kind of me divided too.
Right. I'm sure.
And so, it was truly a lot of just deep conversations with God until I felt enough peace to say, I will go on a date.
Okay.
I will go on a date and see what happens.
Yeah. So you did. And that turned into several more dates, which turned into another wedding date.
It did.
Was it 6 months later, if I remember?
It was about, just about 9 months later. Yep. Yep.
And you guys got remarried.
We did. We got remarried. Yep.
And
with a marriage license in the state of Hawaii versus California this time. So we laugh about it now. We're like, second marriage license is in Hawaii with a few family members there. And that was it. Yeah.
And how were you feeling at that time? Things are, you're fresh start again. You're excited, I'm sure. Like, we're going to have our family together and grow our family.
Yep. We had talked about that. Deep conversations about that. And there were, if I look back, there were still some flags of things that, I probably could have taken more time in hindsight to really dig deep. I did see a lot of newness in him, and then there were still old patterns and things that were there. And so I think I was cautious. I was happy. Like, there were a lot of, and not that it was all happiness, but like there were happy moments that I really could say, okay, I can really see this. There were trusting moments. There were things like, I will not do that again.
Yeah. You guys, I'm sure that time apart, you're different people coming back together again. Right. And he gives you prior to, he had given you somewhat of a revelation or a surprise of something that he had done while you guys were apart.
Yep.
And so that created another hurdle.
It was.
Yeah.
When he had chosen a vasectomy we weren't talking about that. So that was his choice. And didn't give me all that information up front in our dating in those 9 months. And by the time I found that out, that was probably my biggest flag of why wouldn't you have told me on date 1 or in the letter, knowing how important that is to me.
Right.
So these misses of, and some deception in that, withholding, I'll say, of information that was very important for me to know.
Right.
So that was probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you went on, he got it reversed. You went on to have 2 more kiddos.
We did.
That's amazing.
Yep.
And you also made some medical changes or some medical decisions that were pretty significant at that time too. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So I'm thinking it was right after we were remarried is when, so let me back up just a tad. When we moved back in with my parents, so when Connor and I moved back in with my parents, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer at the time. So we were there to support her through that and, be of support. But she was in her 40s. My grandmother had breast cancer in her 40s. So when we got remarried, I thought, this is kind of high risk for me now. I really want to be paying attention to this. And so I was tested and had the BRCA1 gene mutation.
Yep.
So I knew that would be a part of my journey because I wanted to be here long-term for my kids. I knew my risk factors were so high. And that was a conversation that Kevin and I had because I knew that a mastectomy was in my near future. And, having my ovaries removed was probably not far beyond that. And so that was our second son was born we were remarried in 2003 and our second son was born in 2004. And later in that year is when I had the mastectomy with full reconstruction. And so that was a very big, that's a very big part of my femininity and, sexuality and all of that in marriage. Sure. So that was, he was very supportive and very honoring with that. And so that was, those things mattered to me.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this and I just admired it. It gave me the courage to go and get my genetic testing done. And was in my mind fully prepared that if that was the result, I would have done the same thing just to avoid it.
Yeah,
and your boobs are beautiful.
Thank you.
You're good.
Thanks. Hey, I don't have to wear a bra all the time. Right. It's good.
It must be nice.
It's good.
Okay. Well, so then some other things, you start to see some of those, I don't know. I guess red flags, some
patterns or some of the, I guess there were communication gaps. There was things in our relationship. So let me add back to the original question. That's when we moved to Arizona. So when we had our second son, I knew that I wanted to stay home for a while. So I hadn't been able to stay home the way I wanted to with Connor. And so we were looking at housing prices. And as you all know, I think it was $0.25 to the dollar that we sold our house in California and then came to Arizona and the house we're still in.
Yes. This is awesome.
And so that was really important to us. And so we moved to Arizona.
And your family followed.
They did.
Which is so cool.
It was like, put your hands in the middle and everybody say, are we going to do this together? So so
I love
great.
that because that's just like us, right? We were same thing. We had our oldest living in California and thinking this isn't where I want to raise my kids. Like we want more and settled on Arizona. I love that.
Yep.
So,
still in Power Ranch.
Yeah,
so
still we're both still here.
Exactly. Representing.
Yes.
So it's good.
Okay. So yes, but then one night.
So then things are off. Yeah. And so we were remarried, like I said, in 2003, and things were good for a while. Several years, felt really sweet and good. Tyler was born in 2004. Caitlin was born in early 2007, and things felt good. Not great, but there were still gaps in our connection and, and when I say intimacy, more emotional intimacy, that sort of thing. And then it came, it started getting rough and I was getting suspicious. I was getting I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but I was concerned. Something's off. And so honestly, I still had moments of trigger and response.
I was going to say, I could imagine that any little thing you might resort back just out of protection.
Exactly.
Right?
That you're going to leave again.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was really, there were moments and every time the kids got, the babies got a certain age, I would have that moment too. And he'd reassure me, I'm not leaving the marriage. I'm not leaving the marriage. And so that, that built trust. But at the end of the day, it was in 2009 and, 2009 that probably spring, I was like, something's off, like something's off. And I didn't know what, I really didn't know what. And I was then shocked with incredibly difficult information, and he had been unfaithful and didn't leave the marriage in the way he had the first time, but left the marriage, in his fidelity to me. And I still remember that day. I still can remember the last day or the night before the last day of school. And it took me years. I can talk about it now, but it took me years to really get through that trauma of what is this text? Who is this? And why are you talking to someone else? Even though it wasn't super suspicious, I knew, like the Holy Spirit in me just knew, just knew.
Yep.
And I woke him up and we stayed up almost the whole night. And he was done running from what we later realized was a form of, love addiction, sex addiction, and, multiple affairs that he tried to stop, hence the addiction word. He tried to stop on his own and knew it was wrong, and couldn't stop on his own until I caught him and discovered it all. Yeah.
Okay, I want to stop your story there for a minute, and let's talk about that side of it. You said love addiction, sex addiction. Can you go into, for those that are listening, like what is that?
Yeah. Really what it is, and I, do this work now professionally years later, just giving back to those of similar experience. And sex addiction umbrella can be a lot of things. So the word it's scary. So even for listeners hearing that, what in the world does that mean? So that can be a pornography addiction. That can be compulsive behavior that is sexual in nature. So all things from fetishes to cross-dressing to, I'll call it like soft porn or sexting or those sorts of things. All of those, and I'm probably just touching the surface, but all of that goes under the umbrella of sex addiction. And he didn't have a pornography addiction. He didn't have compulsive use of pornography. That wasn't his means of coping. So that always never fully fit. But one of the, I guess, kind of parts or, categories under sex addiction is a love addiction, where you're craving to feel loved, and you're finding it in places that are, coping, maladaptive, basically coping behaviors. And that's when sometimes chronic affairs come in. Single affairs may not be considered addictive in that nature, or emotional affairs, but there can be chronic emotional affairs that kind of falls into, love addiction. And so we, we're able to, not everybody likes a label around it, but for us, it made sense because then we knew what support we needed. And almost 15 years ago next month is when this happened.
Wow.
And so back then there wasn't a lot of support. Oh, yeah. Now there's a lot of support because what I didn't know was I was going through betrayal trauma. And I didn't realize, I knew I knew what it was, but I just didn't have a name for it. He had a name for it. So it was like, okay, at least we can get him some help. Yeah. Whereas now we know more about it. Right. So there's a lot of 12-step programs and lots of resources and lots of certified sex addiction therapists and things like that can specialize in this work. Yeah. And so that's why we talk about it. That's why we say the name. That's why we, give it the label, not to shame at all, but to give it something identifiable so that people can get support and help.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I also want to say, just Kevin, and you can talk about this too, but I know he was a big supporter in pushing you to say you should write a book.
Yeah, he was.
That's powerful.
He was. Because I say my name's on it, but his whole story is in it. So, looking at that, I'm like, you're just as brave as I am to even put this out there, because this is not the type of thing. And I'll just talk for a minute about grief. Though it wasn't a divorce grief, and I didn't get to say, oh, well, I had a divorce, so hence I lost weight, my jeans don't fit. This is, it's so isolating for people. It's so isolating because you're going to get a lot of judgment a lot of times. And so, and not necessarily on purpose or because people want it, but people don't know what to do with it now. And the more we talk about it, the less shaming we're making it. There's a reason for it. Just like there's a reason to be on our phones compulsively, just like there's a reason to be eating compulsively or, whatever it is, gaming, whatever it is. But somehow I think in our culture and probably across the world is the conversation around sex addiction or infidelity around that is, it's just been tabooed. And so the person that's been betrayed or been impacted, as well as the one doing the work, doesn't find, support as easily sometimes.
Yeah. And I think there is just shame in our struggles, and it's so unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way.
That's right.
And actually, I think so much healing can come from sharing your story because there are parts of it, I'm sure, and I'm sure just as you've gone through, and it's going to continue to happen, that people are going to connect to different parts of your story differently. Yes. And it's going to help them. And that validation of like, I'm not alone or I'm not the only one, but sometimes that's how it feels.
Yeah.
Like we're the only one going through this. Nobody can relate. Why is this happening to me? Yeah. And really there's probably so much more of these stories that are happening all around us that we just don't even know. Yeah. So that's why I think it's so powerful that you're sharing this. Is that part of, or maybe you can talk to that, like what compelled you? Because I don't want to give all of it okay. Yeah. They need to read the book.
Yeah. There's a lot of hours of reading. They can get more details.
So it's so good.
Thank you.
And it's redemptive too. And I don't want to talk about that, but how did you get to that place of like,
the thing that I think, and there are a lot of parts of our story, and just now getting my proof copy today and things, and it's not even out. I'm already hearing things that I didn't even realize, or people going, wow, I was on the other shoe. I was actually in your husband's shoes, or I was in, my husband's in your shoes. Whatever that is, like there's so many parts that I didn't really want to write. This was a God assignment too. And I'm like, oh goodness. Okay. We're going to do this. It was not on my agenda for life at all. But I looked at it and when I started writing, it was 7 years ago. It was before I was like professionally coaching in this arena. And so I look at it and I think if this can help one person, and I know that can be like a cliche thought, but truly like this is where Kevin, when he looked at me and I said, I wonder one day if like her story could be, and I wanted someone else to write it, if I'm honest. Like I was like, let me just tell you it and you can put it into words, right? But it wouldn't have been my story. And I knew I could tell stories. I just didn't have the confidence as a writer. And I've gained like, it's my story. And yes, do I have editors? Yes, of course. Do I have designers? Yes, of course. But to look at all the different parts and what we went through and to share that experience, if 1 or 2 or 10 people or 100 people, whatever, can glean from that hope and healing, then it's worth it to me. It's worth it to me. And we'll put it all out there. And not everybody's going to love every part, or they're not going to align, and that's okay. That's okay. But if it can share an experience so they know they're not alone, because even a single mom in her 20s with a little baby, like, where do you date? Right. Like, I went to Disneyland with him. Like, we go watch the fireworks show, and I was like, whoa, this is fun with all the families, So there's a lot of different parts. So going through the betrayal and, Kevin going into recovery, talking about recovery, me going to get help, which it took me a few years because I was like, I'm going to take care of my family now. And I knew at that point I could leave, that just, I had that, but I just never, he started to do the work. He was done running from that. And I know that now 15 years later. But it took one step at a time and one moment at a time.
Yeah. You talk in there, Shawna, about after his confession, admission, whatever, and there's so much more that even goes into that, how for him, it was like almost a weight lifted off of him. And then equally, you're on the other side of that with this massive weight being put on you.
Yeah.
How hard is that you're in completely different places, right? And I could only imagine as a mom, we go into like mama bear protection mode too, right? And wanting to protect our kids. Yep. How did you navigate the kids through all of this?
So at the time, they were 2, 4, and 9. So one of the things that I felt really clear on quickly was they will not know until the timing is right. And I know that can't always be the story for everybody, but for us, that was the right decision at the time. But I looked at, what did I need first? And truly, like, how could I care for myself? Because I still did need to feed them and care for them. And Kevin did as well. But me, I really did go into Mama Bear. And it was like, let's just, and I didn't ignore it. I mean, I did some work, but the focus needed to be me and the kids and not just the kids. But I really was protective of, and I kept the story really tight for a long time because really for their sake more than anything. And, again, I still needed to find people. So it was such a fine balance because sometimes this comes out and people don't have that choice. And that's just tragic and so unfortunate when that has to happen. But for me, that was a big motivating factor until they were old enough to know the story and, not was going to be buttoned up because I don't think anything is ever buttoned up, quite honestly, but that I could be far enough out that I could hold their emotions for them. And so our in-house separation at the time immediately was, I needed full honesty from Kevin. I needed to know that he was willing to tell me whatever I needed to know and that there was never going to be a time that he would say, nope, no more. Right. You've asked too many questions. Like that, he was going to have to sit in that grief mess with me. So as he felt freedom and like that burden lifted, I was like, you just dumped a huge dump truck on me, so it was such a balance because I wanted full honesty. I saw him, I saw the pain behind what he had done. And I did, there was disgust and anger and everything that came with like what you've done. I mean, he had to hold a lot from me too. And it wasn't just me holding it for him. So it just, looking back, I'm like, how did we make it through those first few months? I can imagine. And it was really hard, but it was, those were some of the things that helped me.
Yeah. And you're really vulnerable in the book and sharing some of your struggles too, which I think is so great.
Yeah.
How are the kids now with your, this is out there.
This is out there. I was like, you guys ready? Some of the beta readers had it before the kids. And then Kevin goes, did you send it to the kids yet?
Oh my God.
Oh shoot. I should send them the watermark copy of the book. Right. But I did get their permission. We did get their permission. We waited till all of them did know. And our youngest is now 12. And they were all told at different times through the years, slightly different ages, which I talk about a whole chapter in like how to tell the kids that helped us. But I look at, they have been so supportive. Like it just makes me want to cry because I'm like, you realize like your big family secrets, kiddos from your childhood are in the world. And when one of the things that I felt God was asking me to do when I went to write was don't hide this in the corner of the world. I know that feels safe. Don't hide it because if I want you to put it out, I will do what I need to do with it. And I just don't want you to hide it. And so that required like getting permission from my kids and saying, this is something that we feel we're supposed to do. And what do you guys think? And so they've been sweet encouragers. I don't know that any of them, as of today, have read it quite yet, but they do know the story. So I don't think it'll surprise them. But
no revelations in there?
No, I don't think. There might be little nuances that they might be, whoa, let's not read that. Skip over that page. That's mom and dad. So, yeah.
Okay. So again, without giving away the whole story, can you tell us where you guys are at today?
Yeah. So, I can share the last little bit. It won't, I'm okay with that. So we spent a lot of years doing recovery. I'd spent a lot of years doing work on myself. What are my shortcomings? What's my part in the relationship? Not what he has done, but in the relationship. how do I manage and cope with my own emotions, all of that. And so I talk a lot about that. I talk a lot about boundaries and just being transparent, finding your people, all of that. And again, we had ebbs and flows. So there was a lot of what I want to say emotional deprivation, miscommunication to the point that was pretty extreme. And I'd be like, are we talking two different languages? Like, what is happening? Connection that would start and stop and then start, and he'd be enthusiastic. And then I'd be like, we went to another therapist and we learned all this stuff. Where'd it go? Oh, gone. Like it just flew out the window. So anyways, about a year and a half ago from now, was another tough season. And I was away. I kind of like would spend these days away with God, just in the mountains. I'd just drive up to the mountains. And one time I wrote out the marriage I would stay for and the marriage I wouldn't. And it wasn't about the betrayal anymore. Like he had built a lot of trust, and he travels for work now, and I don't worry. Like it is recoverable. Like it is, you can do this work. And
that's powerful for somebody that's struggling and hearing that
and thinking, can we ever overcome this? Yeah, you can. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of strong boundaries. We have firmer boundaries for the rest of our lives. And that is what I need in place. Do I check his phone all the time? Nope. But do we have an open phone policy? We sure do. I can pick up his phone just the same as he can pick up my phone at any moment. So, there's certain
great
things
rule for marriage in general.
Yeah. If I'm not hiding anything, it's the deception that causes the most harm in all of this. Really. I mean, yes, the behaviors, absolutely devastating, overcoming that. What's the image about myself? All of that was important. But so I was away, and there was a lot of emotional deprivation that I was still wrestling with. And I thought, what is the marriage I will stay for? And what's the marriage I won't? And I wrote it out. And this was actually almost 2 years ago now. And then about a year and a half ago, Kevin had one of those abrupt moments again. And it
really
wasn't.
Quick, I want to pause. You went away. You went in quiet, basically, away, free from distraction, and just had time with the Lord, time with your thoughts. Like there's so much power in that. And so many of us are so busy and so distracted that we're just trying to survive. We're trying to make it. But taking that time away is a really powerful thing to do too. So anyways, I just had to highlight
I need it back. Like I need to get back in the rhythm, because I'm like, once a month, Shawna, you can do this. You can just, mountains are my place. So I'm like, it was, and those are the times that I can really hear and listen, and I'm not moving a million miles a minute, like all of us. So
it's a good note. If you are struggling, and go get away in silence.
Exactly.
Okay. So a year and a half ago,
he has a moment, and he melts down. That's best way to say it. And, there's a lot more detail to it, but there was, what seemingly to me was like maybe moderate argument that didn't, it didn't equate to this level of him kind of running. And when I say running, it's not like I'm divorcing. It's not, I'm going to run to someone else, but like, I can't do this kind of thing. And I thought, what in the world is this? So I write about it more, but, needless to say, it was the catalyst that led us to what then became a diagnosis for him that has been there, now we know, of Asperger or autism level 1. And he was 50 years old. And
how rare is that? Do you know any stats on that? How just an adult at that age of life getting that diagnosis?
There's still a lot of learning around this field. Kids, especially elementary school age, are getting the most research around neurodiversity and autism. ADHD has gotten a lot, even in adults, but I think we were like on the cusp of what I'm seeing more and a lot more, because now, neuroclinical psychologists are able to diagnose it. They're able to identify it different. We've used OCD for a long time. We've used ADHD or ADD for a long time, and autism, which was level 1 autism, was Asperger's. Asperger isn't technically a diagnosis right now. But the words are kind of interchangeable. And so they call it the lost generation because it's there. It's, and for Kevin, it's layered. It's not just autism. Obviously, he had some neglect and emotional abandonment in childhood. And he also had, this addictive component then that isolates someone to not reach out for connection with, your spouse. So there's layers to it, but it made so much sense. I mean, he wept for hours.
Wow.
When I shared a podcast that helped open and give us insight into what possibly could be. And I listened to it and thought, oh my gosh, we've been trying to figure out pieces of, now the autism puzzle awareness and acceptance month kind of stuff makes sense to me because we were trying to fit pieces together and go, why did you just leave? Like, what happened? Like, meltdown, shutdown, and so now we can look back and help give it some context, not okay it, not excuse it, period. And he would say that if he was here, and give some context because he was trying to fit into a world that had, he was trying to figure out the formulas of the world because of some of the deficits. And I know some people have a hard time saying it's a deficit versus a neurodifference. But really in a world that's pretty dominant on neurotypical ideas and ways of communicating, we didn't have that support. That was such a missing piece for us.
Wow.
So that is where we are now, still year and a half out from that. I say, it's never going to be buttoned up, but I will say the hope in it is that we can see each other clearer and better the more information we have about each other, the more willing we're able to, Kevin will say unmask and really, and accept the realities of our struggles, whatever that might be. Because if we do layer it in shame, it's just like this big, heavy blanket over us. And so when we can start to accept, or maybe it's a possibility, or maybe there's some of these characteristics, but it's not a full diagnosis to us, to him, it was important to have it more than it was to me. But I wanted the most authentic version. And that still comes with struggles, but now we know if he has to do things different, we know.
Well, and I think that with any diagnosis so now there are things and tools and whatever that you can use to actually help.
Yes.
To work better. Right. Because it's not going to go away.
No.
Right. But it's like, how do we work within this reality now so that we can be our best selves and best for each other? How can I help support you? Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, different events, the kids know. So, I mean, and that was such lots of shock in our story, lots of, whoa, where'd you go? Like what happened there? But now they can see it. Now we just took a family vacation, all of us, and went, and they'd kind of look over at me like, is that, that's, and so whatever it was, his anxiety's been a little higher because he's trying to figure out, when to interject in a conversation with, context and things like that. Yeah. So that part, it's just a lot more acceptance of where we all are and how we navigate. So I say we're still learning. Yes. It's not buttoned up. Right. That was the one thing I was like, whoops, this book won't ever be like buttoned up and done. Right. But so.
That's awesome though. Yeah. I love that you are so real and raw in the book and sharing so much, having been your friend for so long and not knowing so much of your story. And then the fact, I will be honest, that you were willing to share it with me too, right? You could have just done this. Yeah. I just thought, wow, that's really powerful. So my hope and prayer is that someone hears this today and they're able to get answers and get clarity and have hope at the end of the day, right? To work through whatever it is that they're struggling with. So
true.
A huge thank you to you for sharing it. And one thing you didn't talk about, but I'm sure anyone listening is going to catch on. You have so much strength to like go through all of this and to go through it with grace. And that was one of the things that stood out to me, is just like, wow, Shawna is super strong.
Thank you.
In all ways. So tell us, if someone's listening and wants to get your book, like, what do they do? What's it called? Where can they find it? All of that.
It is on Amazon. Hopefully I'm in the throes of it right now, of who's picking it up and all of that, the Barnes and Nobles, but Amazon is a sure bet. And it will be out this month. So pre-orders are in just a couple days from now. And it's called Determined for More.
Yes. I love it. I love it. Shawna, before we end, we like to end on like a high note. This is all good though. So we want to do a little speed round with you. Are you up for it?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Favorite color?
Green.
Green. Favorite food?
Oh gosh. Wow. I don't know if I know. I have lots of favorite. I know a favorite drink.
Okay.
Can I do
was
that?
my next one.
Okay. So. Matcha tea.
Oh,
that's an easy one for
decadent.
me. Yes. Decadent. That's
so
right.
Good.
Decadent macaron.
Okay. Favorite sound?
Oh, a stream or a creek.
I love that too. That's one of mine. Favorite book?
Oh, favorite book. Wow, I have a lot of them.
Do you?
I have a big bookshelf.
I love books.
I love all things learning about growth.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of authors coming to mind.
Okay. What about a favorite podcast?
Oh, wow. That too. I have lots of them. My goodness. There's a lot of them. Neurodiverse Christian Couples has been one, like, more recently for us, just with some things. Yeah. There's a lot on Betrayal Trauma, APSAT's podcast that I'm listening to a lot and learning from. But there's a lot of them. Those are a couple come to mind.
In your book, you put a Bible verse at every chapter. What is your favorite Bible verse?
Ooh, I would say, oh gosh, now I got to quote it. Isaiah, is it 43? It's, I'm doing a new thing, making streams in the desert. Yep. So I'm paraphrasing, but I'm doing a new thing. Don't you see? I'm doing a new thing. Like, so that's something I've clung to a lot.
I bet.
And especially most recently in the last couple of years is, what is that new thing you're doing, God?
Right.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, favorite vacation.
Oh, I loved Italy. I got to go with my second son to Italy for his life trip a couple years ago.
Amazing.
And probably Florence is my absolute favorite place in the world so far. So
Yeah.
I haven't got to do a lot of international travel, but that's one.
That sounds amazing. Well, thank you for being with us. Thank you for being so open and sharing, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, you bet. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Shawna.
Thanks for listening to The Real Deal, where real estate meets real life. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the Home Selling Team on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify to stay up to date with our podcast.